Now, what you had that was a two-part question. And the other was, what is the basic political impact of digital media? And I have ever since I started doing research on this area in 1974. And right after I finished my dissertation, I was working at the Public Policy Research Organization at UC Irvine. And we were studying the impact of computers in government. And we were mainly looking at, we were funded by the National Science Foundation. It was one of the first projects, I think, in the United States and maybe worldwide to look at, do computers make a difference in government? It's sort of funny now to even think of it. Like, should we buy these things? Should we pay all this money for computers? Will they just screw things up, and will they make things more chaotic? And a lot of money for a little payoff. So the main focus of the study was the impact of computers on management and the productivity of government of operations. But as a political scientist, you have to do some of the work of political science on the side, or on top of what you get paid to do. And the main thing I was interested in was whether there were power shifts related to the introduction of computing in government. And by power shifts, I meant when computers come into an organization like a government or a university or what have you, does it mean that some people, it enhances the role and influence of some people, and maybe diminishes the role of others? For example, in government, it's often, in the early days, people were worried that politicians would lose influence because they didn't understand what these machines were about, and they thought that old style handshaking and knowledge of the city and so forth would be undermined, and more expert planners and professionals would be more likely to gain influence because they knew how to use the new media. So from 74 on, in this study of U.S. cities, we studied power shifts, and we had anyway we basically came up with that computers did result in power shifts, but they were not systematically for one group or another. In organizations, we thought either the power shifts would help top management because they know everything that's going on in the organization, or that it would enhance the technocrats, the people who understood the technology would become more powerful in the organization, or that it would support just every department because computers were going to be general. Anybody used them could influence could enhance their influence. And we came up with, those were our three hypotheses: a pluralist, or a technocratic, or a top management power shift that would be resulting from computers. And we found that there was no consistent shift, but once we correlated that with the structure of power in the city, we found that in a city manager oriented government where the top management had a lot of central control, power shifts tended to reinforce the power of the top management. In a city where there was large cities which were much more fragmented, pluralistic power shifts happen. It basically enhanced the power of all these different centers across the city. And in some cities, there was a technocratic power shift where there was a very strong planning department and whatever. Depending. So we came out of that study with a concept that I think I coined in that area, was called reinforcement politics, which was that the impact of computers and telecommunications in government and in organizations was primarily to reinforce the existing structures of power. It didn't have a systematic power shift away. And then when I started studying cities and the use of cable and communications and cable television and interactive cable and the internet, it was generally this notion of reinforcement politics still looked like the dominant factor. And that's why in 2005 or 2007, when I started to latch onto this idea of the empowerment of individuals, that's not reinforcement politics. That was the first time I'd seen a power shift that really moved away from existing institutions, and that's why I think it makes it difficult if you are focused on existing institutional structures and paradigms to see what's going on, because the fifth estate is not part of your framework. So it's but it was very clear that it was empowering individuals in a way that could not have happened before. I mean, anyway, in my book I want to give a lot of examples, because I think in the abstract I can see it in the survey data about the ability of individuals to source and network with people they choose, with information they choose, and they become a source of information themselves. And it's empowering in those respects. But also there are tons of examples that just, I mean, I cannot read a newspaper now without coming away with 3 or 4 clippings of where there's clearly a fifth estate role in, Greta Thunberg, her whole rise was in part from an Instagram post of her in front of the Swedish Parliament sitting for ages, and absolutely changing the world kind of thing, but emerging out of just an Instagram post that enabled her to get a much larger public presence, and there are just tons of examples like that, and that make it I think will make it more concrete for people. But so the power shifts, I think, are the biggest thing that related to digital media, because otherwise, so much of the study of digital media and politics is about just, does it make it more efficient? Or the idea is that most people just say, okay, how can I use computers and telecommunications to do what we've already done more efficiently and faster and whatever? And I think the fifth estate is not that. It's actually a different. It creates a different power, sort of a new power center in a pluralist democratic state. That said, I mean, even in non-pluralist contexts, I've seen the emergence of a fifth estate. Even in China, we studied a lot of events in China that clearly, without a fifth estate, they would have been totally suppressed, because the press were so controlled by the state in China. We did an article that was very, very difficult, because my Chinese students worked with me, and we did case studies of a variety of events, which, a gas explosion that just about burns down the city was never reported in the press, and just totally did not happen. But individuals had this on their video, and it was able to get this online, and it became undeniable. But even in China, when there are these incredible incidents, it's usually because it's at the regions, and not really involving the central government. And anything to deal with the central government is almost impossible to. So the fifth estate can be squashed in some ways, but even in China, there's a fifth estate role that, and you can see that, well, clearly Hong Kong, you can see the importance of people outside of the institutional structures are still making a difference. But again, that's the future of democracy in Hong Kong is problematic at this point. Yeah.